we are now going to design the rolling enemy just like the jumping enemy. So just to remind how this works, if we drag the jumping enemy into the hierarchy, we can check how it is structured. So we can see that it contains a transform component, the jumping enemy script, so we're going to make one for this new enemy. We have the rigid body, we have a sphere collider, and also in the hierarchy we have a model game object, and then just inside that game object we have the sphere. So what we want to do here is we're going to right click, choose create empty, and this game object is going to be renamed as rolling enemy. Let me move this a little bit more to somewhere we can actually see it. So I'm going to put it on 0, 8, 0 and move it a bit to the right. Okay, so it's going to be better to work with it. Now we right click on rolling enemy, choose create empty, and rename this as model. And now here we're going to right click, choose 3D object and then sphere. But we want this sphere to be a bit bigger than the enemy that we had before, the jumping enemy. So I'm going to scale that to 1.5 on X, Y, and Z. Okay, so it's going to be roughly 50% bigger than the other enemy. Now we want to remove the sphere collider from this because we want the collision logic to run in the rolling enemy game object instead of the sphere. So I'm going to click on this cog and choose remove component, and we also want to add a color to it. So you go to the materials folder, right click, create material. I'm going to rename this as rolling enemy, and now we're going to choose its color. So let's choose this tone of blue here. Now I'm going to drag it here and drop it there. Okay, so we have this, and one thing that might be interesting to this game is to add just 2 very simple eyes to this rolling enemy so we can actually see it rolling around. So in model, I'm going to right click, 3D object, and then sphere. So let's bring it forward a little bit. So let's change Z to -0.5. We want to remove the sphere collider, this is not going to be needed, and the scale, let's change that to 0.3 on all axes. Okay, so let's change Z to something a bit closer, like -0.7. X is going to be -0.3. Y 0.2, and now it looks like an eye. So let's make it closer to the enemy. Okay, so yeah, -0.58 is going to be good. We're going to rename this sphere as eye. Now we right click on it and choose duplicate just to bring the eye to the other side. Okay, so I'm going to select it. I'm going to change the value on X by simply removing the negative sign. Okay, so it's going to look like this, something very simple. Okay. Now, the second step is we want to make the rolling enemy script. So we're going to the scripts folder, we right click, choose create, C# script, and this is going to be rolling enemy. And you notice now we have 2 enemy scripts. We have the jumping enemy and we have the rolling enemy. So to keep things tidy, we might want to add a folder here. Right click, create folder, and this is going to simply be named enemies. Now we choose the jumping enemy and the rolling enemy, so we click on one, hold Command or Control, and click the other one, and drag them both to the enemies folder. Okay, so nothing special is going to change, but it's going to work better. Okay, so we have this jumping enemy here, and now we have to add a rigid body. So in order to mimic almost the same things that we did in here, we can just click on this cog and choose copy component, and in the rolling enemy, by the way, before we do anything else, let's attach the rolling enemy script here. So you select the rolling enemy, drag the script and drop here. And now that we copied the rigid body, we can click on the cog and choose paste component as new. Okay, we're going to have almost all of the, actually we're going to have all of the fields duplicated from this one. Okay, but in our case we want the rolling enemy to rotate in one of its axes. Okay, we want it to rotate like this, okay, around the z-axis. There are 2 ways to do this. One way is to use physics, so when it moves it's going to roll around. Another way is to do things by script. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to check what axis we're going to use. So if we go to rotation and rotate Z, we're going to have more or less the effect that we want. Okay, we want the enemy to rotate like this. So in the rigid body, we're going to remove this freeze rotation on Z. And we're going to test how this is going to work. And the other thing that's missing is the sphere collider. So we can select the rolling enemy, click on the cog, actually click on add component, and we can search for sphere collider. Now we click here, and we're going to change its radius to something that is going to be around the entire enemy. So we're going to try 0.75. Okay, you're going to see that it's going to have exactly the proper radius. And notice that the radius that we use is half the size of the sphere. Okay, right now it's 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. Why it's half? Because 1.5 here is the diameter of the sphere. Okay, it's from one side to the opposite side, but the radius is half of the diameter. That's why we use exactly half the value that we added to the scale. If the sphere size was 2 on all the axes, on X, Y, and Z, then in the rolling enemy sphere collider, the radius would be 1. Okay, you see that it perfectly fits the sphere. But as we are using something smaller, we use 0.75 here and 1.5 here. Okay, and now that we have this, let's remove the jumping enemy from here. Let's just leave the rolling enemy. And if we press play, the rolling enemy is simply going to fall. Okay, it's going to be here standing in the floor, and if we give it a little push, you see that it rotates in that axis. Okay, and that's exactly what we want. We want the enemy to rotate to the sides like this. Alright, and now that we have this, let's transform the rolling enemy into a prefab. So I'm going to drag the rolling enemy from here and drop in the prefabs folder. Okay, let's by the way bring it down a little bit, so I'm going to position it here. Let's also press apply, so this position is going to be saved. And in the next video, let's work on making the rolling enemy move.